Hey, thank y'all for being here. I get to ask questions last. It's, I guess, polite, but it's actually selfish. Now I get to go as long as I want. Dr. Kesselheim, you said that investment has not fallen in biotech, and I think it was in relation to a question about the impact of the IRA. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I said in relation to the IRA, there's been.
Now, let me ask.
Yeah.
Now, what about, because I hear from biotech, I'm going to have Mr. Crowley respond in just a second, that that much of this offshoring to China has had a very negative impact upon biotech and investment in biotech. Would you include that in your statement that there's not been a decrease?
Well, I think it's very important to try to promote biotechnology development and manufacturing in the U.S. The question that I answered was related to the IRA and the
Now,
effect
can you
the IRA had.
differentiate the IRA from the impact of offshoring to China?
Right. So my response was related to the impact of the IRA, not related to
Have you seen a decrease in investment related to the offshoring of activity to China?
I think, as I said, I think that we have seen a movement in offshoring of companies' investment in manufacturing to China, and that's why I think that there need to be efforts to try to move that kind of manufacturing back to the U.S.
Mr. Crowley, can you actually tell it, and how do you parse it? How can you parse the impact of the IRA? And I'm asking totally, I don't know the answer here. Parse the difference between offshoring versus the IRA. Can you parse that? Has there been a decrease in investment in biotech?
You know, I think, Senator, just to frame it, this has been a tough 4.5 years for emerging biotechnology. We can provide you as a follow-up lots of stats and statistics, the market value of companies, number of IPOs, number of programs being cut, and there are a lot of factors for that as well. With respect to the IRA, it's going to be really hard to understand how many programs would have been funded but for the IRA. It's hard to prove the negative, and I agree with Dr. Kesselheim. In the near term, generally R&D programs continue to be funded. It's the long-term impact that we worry about. I think the important fix, though, to the IRA and what we're clearly seeing, and you can talk to any venture investor, private market investor, companies, large companies, as they look at their portfolio, is a shift away from small molecules to away from small molecules to large molecules because of the 9 versus 13.
Has there been a shift in that investment?
Disparity.
Can you see a discernible shift? Could Kesselheim say, oh my gosh, here, right now, I see there's been money moving towards the longer duration versus the shorter duration research?
I think it's more the research funding, particularly in the early stage, Senator, moving more toward large molecules away from small molecules and not following the science, particularly when small molecules are so important. You know, they cross the blood-brain barrier, as you know. They are the drugs most likely
I'm going to pause you for a
generic.
second just because I got like a lot of questions, and even though I got a lot of time, I'm still going to go. Mr. Schiller, you talk about domestic manufacturing. There was a generic drug plant in Shreveport recently closed, Dr. Reddy's, went back to India, left all their equipment. And the labor cost and whatever in the United States, they just cheaper to make it there and to ship it here. And I asked about robotics. And they said, well, you can do robotics, but that, and you mentioned this, the upfront cost to invest in robotics is so much that still you're better off going to India. That's what I was told. Is that true? Because you're advocating a reshoring of manufacturing, but is the cost of generics so little that even if we put in advanced manufacturing, we'll always be at a competitive disadvantage?
I do believe that is a problem, Senator, that the margins on many generic products have gotten so low that it's not profitable to manufacture many of them in the United States. And if you have some amount of upfront investment in advanced manufacturing facilities where the unit cost does go down, that can help. But finding the capital to invest upfront.
But if you found the capital to invest, would it level out over end if you amortize the investment over 20 years? I mean, has anybody put, finger to keyboard to put it in a spreadsheet to see if that works out?
Part of the problem is that the capital isn't sitting in an account to invest upfront to then amortize.
Dr. McHour, you're the one who kind of told me about this post-FDA marketing being a problem. Now, I talked to CMS regarding another aspect of this, and they told me that the FDA, and I think you said, it's not in front of me, but like 9 to 7 years between FDA approval and actually getting insurance coverage?
5.7 years.
5.7? that FDA uses a safe and effective standard, and CMS uses a reasonable and necessary standard, which is not, they kind of overlap, if you will. They're not entirely. Is that what the holdup is?
That's part of it. I think one of the complications is that reasonable and necessary has not really been defined. Whereas in a lot of FDA studies, safety and efficacy is agreed on and negotiated in the whatever trial or design, and it is the study's either met or not. It's really unclear how reasonable and necessary is fundamentally determined. The big challenge is that we have a system where these innovations can be created, proven to be safe and effective by the FDA, but there are substantial time delays even in accomplishing coding, going through the coverage decisions. It's just an extremely Byzantine and very long process. And during that time, investors are just funding these companies.
Now, is that something which reasonably could be addressed by AI?
I actually do believe so. AI could be exceptionally helpful. There needs to be process reform, for sure.
But that's against CMS.
That's
Mr.
on
Schiller,
CMS.
I'm going to ask you to comment on something that Dr. Mackauer said, because you were formerly at the FDA, but you may not know this. But I'll let anybody take a crack. That under the Biden administration, that there was a increased emphasis upon third-party review, but you say, Dr. Mackauer, that the FDA will then re-review. You don't actually say it, but you strongly imply it, and which defeats the purpose. Like, why in the heck would they re-review if you just third-party reviewed?
Thank you for the question, Senator. That has been an issue, and there has been substantial underutilization of the third-party review pathway because the benefit isn't that clear. And part of that is variable quality in the third-party reviews. FDA could be doing more to ensure that the third parties who come in and do the reviews are able to do it consistently, predictably. When there is inconsistency in those reviews, it also diminishes the incentive to do that third-party review. If, as a manufacturer, you can expect an easier process with the FDA rather than that third party.
So then if it's the third-party review is inconsistent, there should be some sort of quality control on third-party reviewers, and you get rid of the people who are lousy and you keep the people who are good, huh? I mean, that's kind of like third-party review 101.
If I can step in on a couple of points that were made. One, in terms of the third-party review system, Mr. Schiller is correct that only about 2% of devices in recent years have actually undergone third-party review. It's a very small amount, but a government audit was actually done to actually show discrepancies in terms of vendor quality, which have forced FDA to actually step in to do a re-review. So there are things to address sort of efficiency. There were some recommendations that were put forward both to FDA and Congress on how that might be used. A key aspect of this is that the third-party review is actually funded from leftover funds from the user fee program. So it's kind of whatever is left is then goes to third-party review to be able to identify vendors to actually do that sort of process in the first place, which is not really efficient use of the funds, frankly. And on top of that, it's compounded by another larger issue in terms of the quality of pre-market evidence that is submitted by medical device manufacturers. We did a big analysis of all breakthrough devices that have been approved by the FDA as of 2023, and we found that several, about 1 in 10 medical breakthrough devices don't have any clinical testing to support them. So no sort of verification about safety and efficacy before FDA market authorization. And on top of that, most of those actually did not have post-market requirements to actually make sure that we actually can confirm safety and efficacy. For Medicare in particular, reasonable and necessary also means reasonable and necessary for their beneficiaries, which includes older adults. If you look at the clinical trials that support breakthrough device authorization, older adults are oftentimes not represented in those trials. So we're not even testing in them in the population that Medicare covers, which would also introduce complexities in terms of Medicare coverage. And this is why they've employed things like coverage of evidence development to be able to force
Let me stop you for a second, though. I was trained as a gastroenterologist, so you're going to follow this in a couple different ways. First, it seems like sometimes what you're saying, like it has to be proven for people over 65 as being a little anal. And I say that because if you're looking at whether or not something detects polyps in cancer, if it detects a polyp and a cancer in someone who's 55, it's going to detect it in someone who's 65. There's nothing fundamentally different between cancer shedding whatever it sheds in someone of a different age.
That's correct, and I can grant you that. And this is why, we have FDA authorization, but that also is predicated on the fact that FDA then has the evidence, right, clinical testing, that actually shows that sort of effect.
So, Dr. Makauer, we're hearing a defense of the FDA's process, and your testimony was actually calling for a reform, but that there's not adequate pre-market, there's not a to prescribe post-market, which the FDA should prescribe it. Any other comments upon all that?
Well, I think that the legislation that's in front of Congress actually calls for accelerated coverage and concomitant studies that allow for these questions to be answered in that time frame. I agree with you that very often there's no difference between the studied population that was necessary for pre-market authorization and what the results would be in an older population. But it's certainly reasonable to look at that, and that's called for in the legislation that's in front of Congress now.
I could keep going, but they've called votes. I really appreciate y'all being here. We'll submit some questions for the record. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, who could not be here, has a question for the record that we'll send to you, Mr. Crowley. You've been very helpful, though, and I look forward to, if any of you have continued input, please feel free to continue to give. For any senator wishing to ask additional questions for the records will be due at 5 p.m. Thursday, November 13th. Thank you again for being here.